Thank you all for being here. Good morning. I am Pat Mulvihill. I am the council representative for District 10. I, along with Councilman Hollander, Councilwoman George, Assistant LMPD Chief Josh Judah, and Miss Krista Gwynn and her family, are here today to talk about reintroducing and hopefully adopting a law that would once again prohibit the discharge of firearms, with some noted exceptions, here in Metro Louisville. Unfortunately, we hear almost daily of another tragic shooting. Yet locally, we are powerless to do much about it because Frankfort has preempted us from taking any action. It's no secret that Louisville does not necessarily have the same issues with respect to gun violence as other cities in the state. Nevertheless, the tools from Frankfort to deal with this problem are the same for all cities. There virtually offer none, except for this measure we are introducing today. It does offer some solace for our residents who are scared or alarmed by the sound of needless gunfire, and offers a tool for our police to use that they currently don't have when they are called to investigate gunfire by either ShotSpotter or a resident. It allows police to further investigate those who indiscriminately or purposely fire a gun, especially if such individuals doing the firing can be generally or reasonably identified. Prior to the merger of the city and the county, the city of Louisville had such an ordinance. It did not prohibit discharge of a firearm in the city of Louisville limits. There were no exceptions. Unlike that ordinance, this ordinance does provide for some. But this law is not new, but is what is needed today. In 2003, when the governments merged, there was less density, development, and certainly fewer residents than we have today. However, Louisville has grown by just under 100,000 residents since 2003, and we now have far fewer pockets of rural living and open land. So we now feel is the time to bring this measure back to address reckless gunfire and the associated alarm and damage done by the firing of such weapons to make it safer for us all. And hopefully, in whatever, even if it's the smallest way possible, it can contribute to fewer gun shootings and reduce violence in our community. Next, I would like to turn it over to Bill Hollander, who's going to talk about the meat of the ordinance and also how we feel that it doesn't violate state law nor the Second Amendment. After that, we will hear from Councilwoman George, then Assistant Chief Judah, and finally, we will hear from Ms. Gwen. So, thank you. Bill?
Constituents who have contacted me about gunshots in Louisville Metro have assumed that they were illegal. But there is no general prohibition on firing a gun in Louisville. The ordinance we are proposing today would allow gunfire in certain safe situations when legally defending yourself or your property by law enforcement as part of official duties and during training, at a properly zoned indoor firing range, when legally hunting, and when engaged in target shooting, skeet shooting, sport shooting, or demonstration shooting in permitted premises. Ordinances prohibiting random gunfire outside of those safe situations are common around Kentucky, including in Lexington and smaller communities, and around the country, in Nashville and Cincinnati, for example. The ordinance has no effect on the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, and it is in keeping with the statutes in Kentucky and around the country that prohibit some local firearm laws but allow cities to regulate gunfire within city limits. This is a common sense ordinance, less restrictive than what existed in Louisville prior to merger. No one thinks it will solve our gun violence crisis, but it will give our police officers another important tool, and they need that tool. I hope it can be quickly approved by Metro Council. Councilwoman George.
Concerns with gun violence, including celebratory gunfire, have been a long-standing issue for many of our South End neighborhoods, where its prevalence seems to discount just the basic tenets of density and gravity. Of course, speaking of gravity, we see the impact of gunfire felt deeply, both in the way of loss of life, as well as with the countless reports that the District 21 office receives over the years, accounting for traumatic experiences as well as damage to property. This cost of gunfire in neighborhoods is immeasurable, where full community participation is not allowed to thrive, where people are afraid to be inside their homes, let their children play outside, and where they're afraid to purchase a home or renew a lease to really grow deep roots to have a healthy community. While we know that there are many layers to this issue, I'm proud to be added as a sponsor as one step forward in our path toward a healthier community. Thank you.
We at LMPD support this ordinance because it's needed. It's a tool our officers need. And it defies common sense that there's random gunfire, but that's something we respond to every single day. Every day, our officers are responding to dozens, if not more, calls of people shooting guns in densely populated urban areas. We don't have the tool to enforce, we don't have any enforcement tool for that because right now that is not illegal. Though I think all of us can agree it's unsafe and egregious. This gives us that tool, and we fully support it.
I'm Krista Gwynn. I'm the mother of Christian Gwynn that was murdered in December the 19th, 2019. And I'm also the mother of Victoria Gwynn that was shot and wounded at Ballard Park, who her friend died after, a couple of days later, Dawan Coward, to the gunshot wounds that he received on June the 7th, 2021. So my thing here is that I have a small 13-year-old that now don't enjoy 4th of July, scared of New Year's because of the rapid gunfire that goes on with the celebratory gunfire that they do. My daughter that was wounded, Victoria, she has PTSD. She thinks she hears gunfire, it be fireworks, she's scared. People shooting randomly behind their backyards or in the park. These bullets come down eventually. Someone's gonna get hurt. Someone's gonna get hit. Somebody innocent is gonna probably lose their life, and it has to stop. So we also support the fact that celebratory gunfire should be stopped, and it should be held accountable for whoever is doing that. I lost my son to a drive-by shooting, coming home. He was on his way home. He had a 10 o'clock curfew. My son was pronounced dead at 10:10. He got shot at 9:20, coming down 43rd and Market. My daughter was sitting in a park with her friends, with a bunch of people jumped out of a car and let off over 300 rounds. My daughter got shot in the knee. She had a rod in her leg for the rest of her life, and she watched her friend lose his life. This has to stop. My daughter's 13 and she's scared to go outside. Enough is enough. We're killing our future. Thank you.
Why now? Why is it taking so long to do this?
I don't know that it's, the options have been pretty limited. So I've been in office over 6 years, and I've been looking at ways to negotiate 65-870. This is the only option that we came to, and you have to have support that has to be needed. And so once that was done, or once I talked to LMPD, that happened. But I explored in research for other council people when I was a county attorney on ways to do 65-870, and it's very difficult to negotiate. I think anytime you have an ordinance, you could have a legal challenge. I think we're on solid legal footing. Now, I do think the statute that I just referenced can always be modified, which can change it. But you do have 4 cities that currently in the Commonwealth have something similar, and the city of Louisville had it back in 2002. So for all those years, it stood the test of time. I'm not sure what'll happen if it's, if somebody attacks it, but anytime an ordinance is filed, that can happen.
If this ordinance passes, we will enforce it. There is no higher priority we have than intervening in gun violence, gunfire. staffing is always an issue, but this will be a priority for us. This already is. The reality that we face is we have neighborhoods where we've invested in ShotSpotter, and there currently are limitations to our ability to fully exploit that resource. We're expanding ShotSpotter this year. This makes sense for us to do this, and this is what we want our officers engaged in, stopping people who are engaging in this unsafe behavior. I'd say there's a direct correlation between people who are engaging this level of unsafe behavior and people who are aiming guns at people. And as was said before, much more eloquently than I can say, these bullets come down. Councilwoman George alluded to there's a property cost, there is a human cost of people who have been injured, and there's that collective trauma that way too many of our neighborhoods have, where you wake up and go to bed to the sound of deadly weapons being fired.
This is set as a Class A misdemeanor, so it's the highest level that this government can provide. But it's always up to the prosecution. It's up to deferment. It doesn't, there's always ways that it can be, mitigated down. But we put it at that because it's the closest thing to wanton endangerment, which we can't create felonies here. So it is the highest level, but of course, if you go to court, many things are amended down. They're suspended, but we set it at that because it is closely analogous to wanton endangerment.
I think another tool is, quite frankly, to be able to elevate some of the stories of people who have been impacted through celebratory gunfire. What most people want to be good neighbors, right? Like, most people want to do the right thing, and it's a disconnect between their actions and what the impact is to those living closest to them. And so I would just encourage you that as we progress in this, to really be able to elevate those stories of those who are impacted day to day, because they have something to say, and quite frankly, nothing speaks volumes than the voice of a neighbor. Thank you.
I don't think this is going to hurt. I think it's going to help. It's always somebody's option whether or not they want to speak to us. We have an anonymous tip line that's used very often. We understand that in many neighborhoods, it may not be safe to talk to us, especially out in front of the street. There's plenty of avenues to do that. I think what this shows is LMPD and Metro Council's commitment to trying to do something about the completely unsafe conditions that too many of our people live in. And that's the message I would want to get to people, is we hear you, and we are trying to do more for you. We are trying to get these neighborhoods back to the safety they once had.
Can I say something on that? Can I say something? I think the neighbors would speak up more with that because they don't want to be involved in a crime. For, say, like my son being murdered, people might not want to say, I saw that shooting, but to hear that gunfire going off, they may say, well, 2 houses down, I heard gunshots, and they can remain anonymous. They don't have to be a witness to that. They could just tell the police, this is what I heard, more so than being part of, I seen a crime, somebody get shot. So I think neighbors would step up more with that than to have been noticing violence going on in the neighborhood.